Now, this case study is something we haven't really looked at on this channel yet, and that is how to write a dance sequence for a musical. And often they're created during the workshop or first rehearsal of the first run of a show as a collaboration between director, composer, and choreographer. But I've been asked to write this one with no production date, no final script, no input from the director or choreographer, no lyrics, no dialogue. All I have is a 1.5-page description of the scene to be told entirely through movement. So how do I anticipate the needs of the choreographer, capture that in music, and get the timing right? Hi, I'm Scott. You're watching Inside Musicals, the channel for all things musical theatre. You know, one thing I love about watching a show, listening to a soundtrack, reading a score, is wondering how those composers and writers organise their thoughts. How do they do what they do? So in sharing these case studies, it's not so much that mine is the best way or the only way to do things. It's just one solution to one specific project. But maybe my thought process sparks something for another composer to find their own solution, or helps an actor or director unlock the music that they're working with. So if you get anything out of this video, let me know what you found useful. So we'll start with a brief and how I work with the writer to turn the dramatic idea into music. And then we'll walk through the composition process, section by section with examples, and then we'll hear how it all comes together. Now, this sequence is from the same musical as a previous case study, Mama's Gift. And it's an unusual project in that I'm less of a collaborator and more of a gun for hire. The writer is developing the show independently and just commissioning songs as required. We do discuss each song, but I'm not intimately involved in the day-to-day development of the show, where the songs should go or what they should be. That's why this briefing is so important, to get to the heart of what the music has to do. And I like to start with the big picture. So before we even think about story, I want to understand the client's expectations. How does she imagine this wordless scene playing out? Should it be naturalistic movement with underscore? Or is it stylized movement, maybe dance, a production number? Because they're two very different things. Now, underscore, as it sounds, plays under the scene. It's secondary to dialogue. It often follows the action, so it may include till-ready bars or safety bars, where the music repeats until a given cue and then it moves on. But when you think of a production number, particularly one that's not a song, say the hoedown sequence from Seven Brides for Seven Brothers, the Mamba, Dance at the Gym from West Side Story, or the Hot Honey Rag from Chicago, the music is in your face, front and center, and it's full of character. It drives the action, it defines the timing, and it demands the kinds of tempos, rhythms, and musical gestures that inspire movement. And it's an important distinction, because underscore might be evocative, but it might not be danceable. It's not its job. And I don't want the dancers fighting the music, so I need to approach this with the right mindset. So when the writer says production number, I know that the music needs to gather momentum, build to a climax, and encourage applause. And then we talk story. What makes this moment significant enough to be a dance sequence? Now, for context, this show is a period piece. It's set in the harsh economic climate of Melbourne, Australia in the 1890s. And it's about a young woman who overcomes poverty by sewing garments for the working girls in the brothels of Flinders Lane. And this scene is the first time we encounter the world of Flinders Lane. So it needs to make an impact on the audience, and I need to capture something of that time and place. Now, it's a busy street scene, but it doesn't yet read like a production number because it doesn't have that one defining concept to bring it all together. Now, each of these vignettes of stage business make perfect sense on their own, but it's not clear how they all add up. If I can't tell which of those moments matter and why, how do I know which of those moments to capture in music, let alone pay them off at the end? And so this is where I challenge the writer, not to be mean, not to undermine, but for clarity. And I think the scene's trying to do too much, but more than that, I think it's too naturalistic, too literal. And dance is stylized, it's symbolic, representational, that's its strength. And so we should lean into that. In a way, we're just creating a sketch. We have to trust the choreographer to fill it in later. So we don't specify dance moves, but we can allow space for the choreography to read and allow time for the focus to shift from moment to moment. So we pare it back to its essentials. We do less, but make each moment richer, make it matter more. So from that 1.5 pages of description, we condense it to a 1-paragraph concept. So the purpose of the scene is to establish the nature of this red light district that the main character is about to walk into, and how the rules of business and morality are different here. And we show that by seeing how the girls entice their clients off the streets. So at its simplest, this is a scene of seduction. That's the one concept that drives this moment. And now we can build it back up into a sequence of events that gives me a structure to work from. And the writer tells me she wants to contrast the respectability of the daytime with the sensuality of the evening. So that gets me thinking about two different musical voices for the scene. But before we get to the details, here's the musical structure I end up with. Now, this day section starts in a bright C major key with an introduction, a vamp, and then the main melody in an AABA form. After transition into evening, we're now in F minor. We have another introduction, a vamp that leads us to the main melody. Once again, essentially AABA form. But before that final A section, we have an interlude. Let's call it a C section. If that doesn't sound weird. And then we wrap it up with a coda. Let's see how we got there. In my first attempt at the music, we open the scene at dusk as a cop and a lamplighter do their rounds of the streets. And I want this melody to feel like the end of a lazy afternoon, something the cop might whistle absent-mindedly. So I'm going to go with a slow, lazy rag. Now, ragtime is right for the era of this show. And I love this lazy feel, but theatrically I worry that the top of the scene might be too laid back for the beginning of the production number, because there's no dialogue or lyrics leading into this. So we make a small adjustment. Now the scene opens with the bustle of the city at close of business, before the street's empty. So same story, different dynamic. I'm going to use that same melody, but this time a little more up-tempo, a little more urban. And now I need an intro, so I'm going to use the same rhythm as the melody, but whereas my original version was kind of dreamy, now we have a bit more ta-da! Now, once it's staged, I don't know whether the lights are going to come up on the music, come up after the music, but I do know the cast are going to be streaming on stage. So to give a bit of breathing space before the main melody, I'm going to add a little vamp, which isn't very interesting, so I add some harmonic movement. But I think I can do better. So over a 4-bar phrase, I'm going to add another rhythmic variation to measures 2 and 4. Now, I will play this whole daytime section once we've looked at the bits. But back to the story. Once the sun goes down and the street's empty, I want to pull the tempo back a bit to match the slowing action on the stage. And now it's a little bit more like my original idea, but now I've loosened it up a little. Now, theatrically, the transition from day to night is signalled by the red lights coming on in the windows of the brothels. So to highlight that, I'm going to do what we call Mickey Mousing, which is simply where the music mimics the physical action on the stage or the screen, like a cartoon. Now, in my first attempt at this cue, I resolved the melody back to the tonic, the home key, before that red lights moment. But slowing down and resolving to the tonic is often a cue for the audience to applaud because it feels like the end. We don't want that to happen just yet because we're only halfway through the scene. So now, instead of a false ending, I leave the music hanging and the red lights moment interrupts that silence as though startling us out of a lazy yawn. It's a subtle difference, but to me it feels like it pulls us through the moment even though we've slowed down. So let's hear that whole daytime section. And now we're into the evening section, the meat of the scene. If it's not impolite to talk about Ladies of the Night as meat. So for the music, I want something a little sexier. Now, of course, I go with R&B if I want it to be anachronistic, but I'm going to go with tango because it's historically plausible. But more importantly, it can be slow and sensual or jagged and aggressive. And that contrast is going to be key to choreographic possibility. But much like a working girl, I don't want to blow it all at once. So I hold back my melody and I start with a simple bass line. Now, normally it's not up to the composer or writer to specify staging, lighting, choreography. But the writer gave me an interesting note. Apparently, at the time, the police would turn a blind eye to the girls as long as they didn't step foot onto the street. But they would stand in the doorways, silhouetted by red lights and wearing nothing but black lace. And it's a kind of evocative image that's worth sharing with a director or choreographer. I mean, yes, it's a visual image, it's a design thing, but it's also a doing thing. This is something the characters can play, because this is the beginning of the girls' sales pitch. So I'm going to start with that bass line, but I have one more trick up my sleeve. Now, when or if this musical is produced, I don't know whether they'll have a band for accompaniment or just a piano. So to expand the sonic palette and to plant some seeds for choreography, I'm going to add some sounds from the performers. Finger snaps, wolf whistles, a police whistle, even a rattling money box. No, not a euphemism. Although the G-string fits. I mean, every musical needs a prostitute. Just saying. Les Mis, Miss Saigon, Sweet Charity, Sweeney Todd, Moulin Rouge, Cabaret, Superstar, Oliver. Now, noticing the copper's gone, the women's hustle becomes more overt. So I add a more angular vamp as they venture out onto the street. And once again, I'll play this whole section, I'll put it all together once we've broken it down. With the women and men now circling each other, the men show their interest by humming. Now, as the women make physical contact with the men, this is the first opportunity for partner dancing in the choreography. And here's where I introduce the tango melody, which lurches between dramatic and intimate, aggressive and demure. And each time it occurs, it plays out slightly differently. Now, this B section of the tango, the middle section, is more laid back, sensual, lyrical, more intimate. And this is where the women make a connection with the men. Now, under the melody, I'm using a similar bass line to the beginning of the evening section. But here and there, I add a little flourish, maybe a lift or a fall to suggest moments for the choreography. Just as the girls are about to seal the deal, the cop returns, blows the whistle, everyone scuttles back to the shadows and the doorways. And this is the interlude, a little faster, a little less melodic, and we move through a number of keys. And I wanted to feel a little sneaky. Now, with the cop gone once again, the girls double down, descend on the men, and here I introduce the tango melody again, but this time a little slower, more deliberate, like a paso doble. This brings us to the coda that wraps it all up. We hear the coins drop into the donation box, and we hear the doors slam shut. So let's put that whole evening section together. One thing all composers and writers should be aware of is that while directors can't change a note of music or a word of dialogue or lyrics, they're under no obligation to follow stage direction. So this scene may not play out as I've described. But I've created a musical framework with its own inner logic, with character and contrast and potential. And that's about all I can really control. Although I did kind of lock some of it in by notating things like finger snaps and whistles. So if you really want something in a dance sequence, make sure it's in the music. When it comes to describing a dance sequence in a script, less is definitely more. The more you prescribe, the less they'll use. So make every moment count, make it efficient, make it evocative, and talk story, not dance moves. This has been a long one. Thank you for sticking around. If you have any questions, if anything jumped out at you, leave me a comment. But for now, thank you so much for watching. I do love you. Now get out there and be brilliant.